The other demands that they have in an attempt to move Egypt to an era where we have a civil democratic government.
Right. The thing is, and with respect, that's very easy to say, isn't it, until President Mubarak goes, but it doesn't look like he's going anywhere right now, and he can, presumably, he can just sit there and say, well, you lot can protest as long as you like, but I'm not moving until September.
Well, he can for a little while, but clearly in making concessions, the government has shown us that they are in a position which is becoming weaker, and I think at some point it will become an untenable position. Mr. Mubarak can hold on to power for a little while with the support of the people around him and with the support of other governments around the world, but in the end, the people have spoken. Millions of people have taken to the streets in Egypt. That needs to be respected. We need to move beyond dictatorship to a civil democratic government. That's what the people are asking for. It is perfectly within their rights to ask for that. And I don't see how Mr. Mubarak can justify holding on to power after everything that's happened over the past 11, 12 days. It
was interesting listening to Hossein Boudrari talking about the Constitution and saying that the President couldn't step down because of the Constitution. But I read somewhere in an op-ed in, I think it was the New York Times, talking about the Constitution being a deformed confection of a corrupt regime. It could be that it may not be applicable.
Exactly. That is a very, very valid point. The Constitution has been amended to serve the purposes of Mr. Mubarak and his regime. Lots of constitutional experts are very uncomfortable with the provisions in that Constitution. And I mean, they keep saying that it would not be constitutionally applicable for Mr. Mubarak to go or to cede power at this stage. We keep forgetting that Mr. Mubarak is in his 80s. What would have happened if Mr. Mubarak had died in office? We have to think about the constitutional provisions for that. The Constitution needs to be changed. This is one of the demands of the protesters. How they change it and when it is changed is something that can be discussed, but I don't think that that is a valid reason for Mr. Mubarak to stay in power.
Yeah, but on the other hand, some framework of a constitution is better than none, isn't it?
I'm not sure about that. We have a constitution in Egypt. That constitution has certain provisions which would possibly allow for the president to cede power or transfer some of his authority to other people in the government as a temporary measure, interim measure. He has done so in the past when he has been unwell and gone abroad for surgery. He has ceded power to other people, and there are ways to look at how that can be done. But it is definitely a flawed constitution which needs to be changed, and this is something which will have to be discussed at some point with the opposition and the protesters.
Okay, Dr. Beddoe, we appreciate that. As we say goodbye to you, I just wouldn't mind mixing back to the shots of Liberation Square, and let's just sample some of the sounds that we're hearing from the square there, because as you can tell, the protesters are in pretty good voice.
They're definitely in good spirits back in Tahrir Square. I've spoken to people in Tahrir Square today. They are determined, they are in very good spirits, and they are going to be in Tahrir Square until Mr. Mubarak goes. And people discuss with them how we're going to move to a civil democratic government.
Okay, Rafiq Beddoe, we appreciate that. Thanks very much. Yes, the protesters very much energized, re-energized by the events of today, it seems. Well, Egypt was top of the agenda at an international security summit attended by Western leaders in Germany on Saturday. US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton warned of a perfect storm across the Middle East if genuine reforms are not implemented. From Munich, here's Tim Friend.
World leaders here are playing a game of catch-up. Taken by surprise by events in Egypt, they're grappling with who would take President Mubarak's place if and when he leaves office. US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton warned other leaders in the region they suppress dissent at their peril.
Some leaders may honestly believe that their country is an exception, that their people will not demand greater political or economic opportunities, or that they can be placated with half measures. Again, in the short term, that may be true, but in the long term, it is untenable.
The German leader, Angela Merkel, who saw revolution in Europe 20 years ago, sees parallels now in the Middle East.
Es ist absolut notwendig, It is absolutely indispensable that those freedoms that we hold to be universal, freedom of the press, freedom of opinion, freedom of journalism, be upheld not only in Europe, in the United States, or all over the world, but that those who are in responsibility in Egypt are also called upon to ensure that these rights are respected.
The Quartet group of Middle East peace process mediators who've been meeting here have also been presented with fresh difficulties as a result of unfolding events in Egypt, because they've complicated an already stalled initiative. Until a week ago, many leaders at this conference were happy to do business with President Mubarak, ambivalent about his record so long as there was apparent stability. They deny they were slow to react.
I don't think it's about us being slow. I think it's about us being absolutely sure that what we're able to offer we're going to deliver, because the EU will be involved in the region for years to come, continuing to fulfill the promises that we will now give.
One thing's for certain, world leaders here are desperate to find a new Egyptian administration with which they can do business. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera, Munich.
Well, in a video message to that conference, President Barack Obama's special envoy to Egypt, Frank Wisner, says President Mubarak should remain in power to oversee a transition to democracy. But Washington has distanced itself from his remarks, saying Wisner spoke for himself and not the US government.
The president must stay in office in order to steer those changes through. I therefore believe that President Mubarak's continued leadership is critical. It's his opportunity to write his own legacy. He's given 60 years of his life to the service of his country. This is an ideal moment for him to show the way forward.
Okay, with the protests against Mubarak showing no sign of abating, many observers are looking to the United Nations to step in. But at the UN Security Council, the issue is not even up for discussion. Scott Heidler has the story from New York.
The world is watching live as Egypt is being transformed, but there's a deafening silence from the United Nations' powerful Security Council. The violent unrest has still not been discussed by the Security Council, not even during closed-door meetings. Will that change anytime soon? A clear message from the 5 permanent members of the Council. Russia?
Mr. Ambassador, are you going to discuss Egypt at all today in the Council meeting?
France? China? Britain? And a brush-off from the United States. And from the current president of the Security Council.
Excuse me, Mr. Ambassador, are you going to discuss Egypt at all today?
So why is the Security Council avoiding the discussion? The uprising in Egypt is not yet an international matter, meaning no other nation is directly involved, nor are there refugees fleeing Egypt to neighboring countries. The Council's position is it's not their job.
So far, there has not been a request by members of the Council for a briefing on the situation in Egypt. I think that the current view is that this situation is being dealt with at the national level.
In its 66 years of existence, the Security Council has never discussed an ongoing popular uprising. It's a very sensitive topic to certain nations. But some feel the fact that those 15 nations who sit here haven't even discussed what's going on in Egypt indicates that the Council is out of touch with the world.
The Security Council was a body established in very different circumstances, where the main threat to peace and security was of conflict between states. These days we see that the main threat to stability and to human welfare and to human life is conflict within states.
The UN Secretary General, viewed as the world's moral authority, has commented on Egypt, keeping his statements very similar to those of the United States.
It is important at this juncture that it is ensured that an orderly and a peaceful transition should take place. I urge all the parties to engage in such a dialogue and such process without any further delay.
The Secretary General said he plans on meeting with members of the Security Council to discuss Egypt. As for the UN General Assembly, the body representing 192 nations, any resolution taken up by the delegates would be non-binding and mainly symbolic. They too have not acted in regards to Egypt. Many of them are not considered free nations by international standards, so it's unlikely that those countries would take the hypocritical step of voting for a resolution condemning what's happening in Egypt. Scott Heidler, Al Jazeera, the United Nations.
The international toings and froings of diplomacy. Let's speak to Al Jazeera's Monica Villamizar, joins us now live from Washington. I'd like to speak about this Frank Wisner business. President Obama sends Frank Wisner to Egypt to see what he can do there. Frank Wisner says that President Mubarak should go to see through the transition to a new government. And now the White House says that Frank Wisner was speaking on his own behalf and not on behalf of the president. It's all a bit confusing.
Absolutely, Nick. But I can tell you and our viewers that the State Department has written to Al Jazeera a response, and they have told us that